Amalek. I remember, well, the truth is it happens every year. In years that aren't shaped by COVID, you see families with mothers and children who don't normally come to shul because it's too difficult on a Shabbos morning. On Shabbos Zachor, everyone makes an attempt to come to shul the Shabbos before Purim, just to hear the reading of this passage from the Torah. And what I'd like to explore today is, how is this relevant to us in 2021, when, keep in mind, we don't even know who Amalek is. And even if we would, most of us would be uncomfortable to commit ourselves to the destruction of a nation where their only sin is that many, many years ago, their ancestors did something that we don't like. How could this be relevant to us in our modern and contemporary times? So I'm just going to share with you a source sheet. Just please bear with me.
No, your camera is out.
All right, it's all right.
Oh, it's all right? Okay.
Just want to see how I can share the source sheet. Share. Document. It will just take me one more minute, please.
Was er aan de hand? Stille nacht?
No.
One more second, please.
Ja. Sonja, daar zitten we in de stikken.
Jana.
I do apologize.
Doesn't go.
One more second.
Good evening, everyone.
Mevrouw, misschien helpt een stuk gember wel.
Nou, gedraag je. Gedraag je.
Ja, ik neem ondertussen de tijd om even hier door te lezen. Wat het precies inhoudt. Dus ik
Nou, goed, dat is toch goed.
Ja, daarom.
Geef je even de tijd.
Ja, dan weet ik wat tot wordt verwacht staat.
Ik zeg je toch, ik heb een paar wel, maar dat is goed, ik zeg het tegen jou, de shiur woensdagochtend van Raspio gaat niet door, maar meneer Bio heeft weer internet en die valt dan voor hem in. Dan weet je het.
Okay, do you all see it?
Yeah, I see.
Okay, brilliant.
Oh,
So,
Brilliant.
you all
Mooi.
see it?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
The modern world.
So, let's work through this source sheet, and I hope and trust that by the time this year is over, we're going to have a fresh insight and appreciation to what this ritual is all about. So I'm just moving on to the second page, and we're going to begin the sources. And source number one.
Perhaps you can enlarge it a bit. Very small.
Laat het nou maar, want anders duurt het nog een half uur.
Is that better?
Yes, better.
Nee.
Ja.
Oké, ja.
Ja, is oké.
Let me see if I can do something else.
Het is oké.
This is better, right?
Yes, okay, this is the best, yes.
Okay. So the first source is the passage which we're actually going to read from the Torah on the Shabbos of Zachor. It is a grand total of 3 verses. Zachor es asher asa lecha Amalek baderech b'tzeischa mimitzrayim. You should remember. There is a mitzvah to remember what Amalek did to you on your way from Egypt. And then the verses continue by telling us what Amalek did, which is basically to attack us when we were weak and vulnerable. And then if you look at the end of the paragraph, Timche es zecher Amalek mitachas hashamayim lo tishkach. You should wipe out the memory of Amalek from under the sky. Lo tishkach, don't ever forget to do this. So what we find over here in this passage is a mitzvah to remember and a warning not to forget what our obligation to destroy Amalek. The next paragraphs is the passages from the Torah which describe what Amalek actually did. The first passage which we read tells us about how we're supposed to treat Amalek. But what did Amalek actually do? So that's the second and the third paragraph, what we see now on the source sheet. Vayavo Amalek vayilachem im Yisrael birfidim. Amalek came and fought against the Jewish people in a place called Refidim. The next verses tell us about what happened. We know that Moshe lifts his arms. And if you look at the end of that paragraph, Yehoshua doesn't actually completely destroy Amalek, he only weakens them. In other words, at that battle, the Jewish people didn't, they may have won the battle, but they didn't lose the war. In other words, Amalek still existed to continue fighting the Jewish people. And then the next paragraph is how that passage ends. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe. Hashem told Moshe. This is in the end of Parshas Beshalach. Soiv zois zikaron basefer v'sim bo'ozni Yeshua. Write this down. Kimochai emcha zecher Amalek mitachas hashamayim. I will see to it that the memory of Amalek is completely erased and destroyed. Vayomer ki yad al keiska milchama l'Hashem b'Amalek midardar. There is a war between Hashem and Amalek for every single generation. Now, just if you think that these are just passages from the Torah, we find that this is ruled in halacha, even modern halacha. If we look at source number 2, this is a source from the Rambam, Maimonides, who takes these verses and codifies them in halacha. Says Maimonides, "V'chen mitzvat asei la'abed zera Amalek." It is a mitzvah to destroy the seed of Amalek. Shenemar, we have a verse in the Torah, Timcha zecher Amalek. And the Rambam continues, mitzvat asei lizkor tamid ma'asav hara'im va'arevatot. It is a positive commandment to always remember what Amalek did, to inspire hatred towards Amalek. And the Rambam finishes, she'asur lishkach evaso v'sinaso. We must never forget this. So, obviously, these are very harsh passages, both in the Torah and in halacha. And these are passages which we are committed to once a year. Like I said, the Shabbos before Purim, we all go to shul just to hear these verses in the Torah. And the question I'm raising today is, what is inspiring about this? What is relevant about this? I mean, shouldn't we move on? And to take, I mean, you can't imagine words that are as harsh and as discriminatory as these words. Who is Amalek? What did they do? And why are we, even in 2021, investing so much of our time and effort into remembering this anonymous nation? So just before I continue to share with you the approach that I'd like to talk to you about, I would like to pause and just move on to a piece written by Rav Soloveitchik. And Rav Soloveitchik argues that we need to understand what is Amalek, more than who is Amalek. Amalek, according to Rav Soloveitchik, is not a race. According to Rav Soloveitchik, Amalek is an ideology. And what we are committing ourselves to is not the destruction of a nation or a race, which we don't even know who they are. And if we would, we'd have to kill them. Rather, we are committing ourselves to destroying an ideology, an evil ideology of hatred. Let's read these words. Source number 5. At a meeting of Mizrahi, I repeated in the name of my father of blessed memory that the notion of the Lord will have war against Amalek from generation to generation, which is the pasuk which we just saw, which we just read, is not confined to a certain race, but includes a necessary attack against any nation or group infused with mad hatred that directs its enmity against the community of Israel. In other words, any anti-Semitic nation, any group of people, any ideology driven by hate and by a commitment to the destruction of Israel becomes Amalek. And what the Torah is telling us is, don't be indifferent to such hatred, destroy this hatred. When a nation, I continue in the source, when a nation emblazons on its standard, come, let us cut them off from being a nation so that the name of Israel shall no longer be remembered. This is a pasuk from Tehillim, which appears in the paragraph below that we'll see in a minute. In other words, if a nation says, let's cut them off from being a nation so that the name of Israel shall no longer be remembered, they become Amalek. In the 1930s and 1940s, it was the Nazis with Hitler at their helm filled this role. In this most recent period, they were the Amalekites, the representatives of insane hate. Today, the throngs of Nasser and the Mufti have taken their place. If we look at source 6, if you look at Pasuk Hey, this is the verse which Rav Soloveitchik quoted. Amru, the nation said, L'chu v'nachide migo v'lo yizacher shem Yisrael od. They have said, come and let us cut them off from being a nation, so that the name of Israel shall no longer be remembered. So this is Rav Soloveitchik's approach. Rav Soloveitchik teaches us that Amalek is not a race, it's an ideology. And if a nation is committed to the destruction of Israel, they become Amalek. And what we are required, what Shabbos Zachor tells us to do, is to never forget what this hatred has done to us, and to always be committed to be prepared for this hatred and to respond to this hatred. I think this is a nice approach. When I say nice, I think it's an accurate approach. And to a certain extent, Rav Soloveitchik his approach answers our question. Even in 2021, we are required to remember everything that Amalek did to us. Who is Amalek? All the enemies of the Jewish people throughout history. And we are required to ensure that this hatred never repeats itself. And indeed, this is very relevant even in 2021. But in the next few minutes, I'd like to share with you a completely different approach, which I think you'll find very interesting. What we have in front of us, do you all see the source sheet that's in front of you? Paul, can you see the source sheet?
Yes,
Yes,
sorry,
that's
yes.
right. We see
Brilliant.
it.
They moved, mute. Yes, it's okay.
Yes,
See.
we can.
All right. So we're looking at a passage we're looking at a page from the Talmud, and there is a text that is underlined. This page of the Talmud is from Tractate Megillah. I believe it's Yud Daled Amud Beis. And there is a short teaching in the name of Rava. Let's study it together. Omar Rava. Rava said, Mechayev inish libesumi bipuria. Ad de lo yoda bein oru Haman lebaruch Mordechai. Rava is telling us that on Purim, bipuria, on Purim, one is obligated to drink so much alcohol until one can no longer differentiate between cursing Haman and blessing Mordechai. I will explain what this means, but just as an introduction, this passage in the Talmud is the source for drinking alcohol on Purim. This is where it all comes from. Rava says that one is michayev, one is obligated to drink so much alcohol on Purim. How much? On Pesach, 4 cups of wine. How much on Purim? Ad lo yoda, until he gets so drunk that one can no longer differentiate between cursing Haman and blessing Mordechai. Now, this is not just an interesting passage in the Talmud. This has been also codified in halacha. If we look at the source sheet that's now in front of you, this is a copy of the Shulchan Aruch. And if you look at the second paragraph, which starts with the letter Bet, this is the halacha which discusses the halacha of Su'udat Purim, the meal of Purim. So the halacha literally repeats the same words from the Talmud, from Rava. Chayav inish lebesumi bepuria. It's in bold. One must drink so much alcohol on Purim until one no longer can differentiate between the value of cursing Haman and the value of blessing Mordechai. Now, before we explore this, let's just continue and to understand this halacha practically. The halacha continues, V'yesh omrim de'ein tzarich lehishtaker kol kach. This doesn't mean that you really have to get so drunk. Elo sheyishte yoser milimudo. One should drink a bit more than usual. V'yishan, and then should sleep. Umitoch sheyishan eino yodea ben or Haman lebaruch Mordechai. In one sleep, one can no longer differentiate between cursing Haman and Baruch Mordechai. So what the Rama over here is telling us is that, yes, we're supposed to, on Purim, reach a state where you can no longer cognitively differentiate between cursing Haman and Baruch Mordechai. But you can do that just by sleeping. You don't really have to drink so much alcohol. So if you drink a bit of alcohol and then you go to sleep, so when you sleep, you already reach that state. But nevertheless, what we saw in the Talmud and then in the halacha is that the truth is not how we apply this halacha. Applying this halacha, you could just go to sleep. But what is the halacha in its purity? The halacha is that one should get so drunk until you cannot differentiate between the value of cursing Haman and blessing Mordechai. Now, if I just draw your attention to the words of the Taz, I'm enlarging it over here. The Taz is really perplexed by this strange halacha, which I'm sure you all find very strange. I mean, how can you no longer tell the difference between cursing Haman and blessing Mordechai? It's like mixing night and day. Why do we have to do this on Purim? How does this halacha make any logical sense? How is it reasonable? How is it relevant? Says the Taz in this underlined text, Chayav inish lebesumi. Rabim rotzim letaretz ulefaresh ma hakavana bezeh. A lot of people over the years try to explain and to interpret what this means. Velo nityashev. Over hundreds of years of Jewish scholarship, no one has presented a reasonable explanation and interpretation of this halacha. It's so strange. It's so ununderstandable that even though for hundreds of years, great scholars have tried to explain what it is, what's behind this, what is this supposed to mean, what are we supposed to learn from this, what this teaches us, nevertheless, no one has successfully presented a reasonable explanation. Why is it a mitzvah on Purim to drink alcohol to the point that you can no longer differentiate between cursing Haman and blessing Mordechai? Just 1 second, please. I just want to see how I unshare this now. Which I'm not sure how to. Can anyone guide me on how I unshare, on how I
should be on the top to unshare it.
On the top?
I think so, yes.
Ah.
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right. So how do we understand this halacha? So to understand this halacha, I want to ask with you another question. Who is Haman? Haman is a descendant of Amalek. On Purim, let's explore the words of Rava very, very carefully. On Purim, we are asked to confuse Haman and Mordechai. These two opposites, Haman and Mordechai, on Purim, we're supposed to drink so much till we can no longer differentiate, till we can no longer tell the difference between Haman and Mordechai, which means till we can no longer tell the difference between Amalek and Yisrael. That's what we're doing on Purim. We're drinking so much alcohol till we can no longer differentiate between Amalek and Yisrael. We confuse the two. Now, what do we do, my friends, on Shabbat Zachor? This year, Shabbos Zachor and Purim are separated from each other to the maximum amount of time. Purim is on Friday, and Shabbos Zachor is on Shabbos. So you have almost a week separating the two. But sometimes Purim can be Motzei Shabbos, in which case you have hours which separate the reading of Zachor on Shabbos and then Purim. That's it, just a few hours. What do we do on Shabbos Zachor, this coming Shabbat? We highlight the difference between Amalek and Yisrael. We read this passage which differentiates Amalek and Yisrael. It places Amalek and Yisrael in two extremes. It separates the two. It highlights the difference between Amalek and Yisrael. So what we find that halacha is doing to us over the course of Shabbos Zachor and Purim is it's taking us on a journey. On Shabbos Zachor, we highlight the difference between Amalek and Yisrael. We separate the two. We divide the two. We commit ourselves to war between the two and the destruction of one over the other. We highlight the difference between Amalek and Yisrael. We move them apart. And on Purim, that very difference is blurred. The very separation, the very difference, the barrier, the wall which we built and established on Shabbos Zachor, on Purim, we take down the wall, we blur the difference. We're confused between Haman and Mordechai. We can no longer tell the difference. And like I said, this year, we have almost a week to go through this transition, but some years, it's a question of hours of going from one extreme to another extreme, from separating Amalek and Yisrael to two extremes, and then to blur that very difference. What is halacha doing to us? Why are we embarking on such a journey? Why is this so important? How is it even possible? I think the answer is very, very simple. My dear friends, what is the name of this Shabbos? Who can answer?
Shabbos Zachor.
Zachor. What does Zachor mean?
Herinnering.
Sorry?
Yes, in Dutch.
Remember.
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 I
To
said it
remember.
in Dutch.
Lizkor. To remember. How do you say it in French?
No, in Dutch.
No, but in French, how do you say to remember? On se
Uh,
souvient? On doit souvenir? Non. Oui, quelque chose comme ça.
oh.
Mm.
Who studied Introduction to Psychology? Where does remembering, which organ in our body is responsible of our memory?
De brains.
Sorry?
De brains. De hersenen.
Brain.
Brain.
Memory is in our brain. There's a part of our brain that's responsible for memory. So on Shabbos Zachor, when we're taught to remember, we're taught to think. We're told to understand. It's an intellectual understanding. It's something which is happening in our minds and in our brains. Now, what happens to our minds when we drink alcohol?
Terrible.
What does alcohol do to the brain?
You can't remember something.
The alcohol compromises the ability of the brain to operate effectively.
Yes, and to separate bad from good.
So what happens when we're under the influence of alcohol?
Then we think that everything is okay.
Why? Because we stop thinking, and we start feeling
things.
Yes.
We stop thinking.
The emotion, only the emotion.
Exactly. We stop thinking and we start feeling.
Or maybe we go with our thinking to other level, and then we think everything bad or good doesn't matter. Everything comes from above, from Hashem.
Maybe, but that's not a thought. That's already a feeling. Again, the alcohol. Why should we never drive when we drink alcohol, even a bit? Because we can no longer. Our brain doesn't work as much as it should. The Chazal teach us, Nichnas yain yatsa sod. If you want to know what the real feelings of a person are, who he loves, who he hates, listen to him or her when they're drunk, because that's when the real feelings come out.
It's so good.
I finished with the thing. When do you finish with this about?
At 9 o'clock.
Okay.
You can give me a little bit on a plate.
So
also, I want to ask for maybe some.
One moment.
So maybe.
Eli, get your microphone.
No, it's okay.
Yes.
It's okay.
So on Shabbat Zachor, we think, And on Purim, we feel. That's what's happening. On Shabbos Zachor, we remember. On Purim, we feel. We can no longer remember, we feel. Now, what is halacha telling us? You know, there's a lot of different approaches to how to deal with evil in the world. There are a lot of people that in their minds, they're very liberal. But deep inside, they're racists. So in their minds, they'll say we need equal rights for everyone, color, not color, da 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 da. But inside, if their daughter would come home with someone who doesn't look exactly like, they would go crazy. In other words, there is a difference between how people think and feel. I think halacha is telling us as follows. What is the right approach to people and sometimes to evil people? How are we supposed to deal with them? How are we supposed to approach them? So halacha is telling us, when you feel in your heart, there's no difference between Haman and Mordechai. In your heart, in how you feel towards another human being, there's never racism, there's never discrimination, there should never be prejudice. Inside our hearts, we should be people who only love other people. In our hearts, and this is very important, there should never be hate. Because when hate becomes a feeling, when hate becomes an emotion, it becomes uncontrollable. A person who feels hate cannot control it.
And destructive, very destructive.
Uncontrollable and destructive. So the Torah is telling us, in your heart, when you're not thinking, when you're feeling, on Purim, when you're feeling, you shouldn't even be able to tell the difference between Haman and Mordechai. Both are human beings. There's no hate. But when you think, not when you feel, when you think, one must understand, one must remember, one must be aware intellectually that there is evil in the world, that there are some people who aren't good people. And in your mind, one should commit oneself to destroying that hate, to destroying evil, to addressing evil, to moving evil from the world. But all this has to be in the mind, because only there it can be controlled. Once hatred leaves the mind and goes into the feelings, into the heart, then it's no longer controllable. So this is what halacha in its greatness is telling us, my dear friends. On Shabbos Zachor, we think, we remember, we understand that we live in a complicated world, and in this world, some people deserve to be punished because of the things they do, and one cannot reward bad behavior with love. One has to reward bad behavior with justice. And all that has to be in the mind. But then we move on to Purim. And then we shut off the mind and we open our hearts. And in our hearts, where we feel, over there we feel only love for every human being. And this is how, within one person, love for every human being and the need to pursue justice and punishment to bad people, all this can coexist within one person. And this is the beautiful message, in my humble view, of Shabbos Zachor and Purim. We're not moving from one extreme to another extreme. We're moving from one place of our humanity, thought, into intellect, understanding, to another place of our humanity. And this is the right balance, the right approach to living in a complicated world where evil and goodness is always mixed together. So if you're asking me, going back to our original question, this is, by the way, the meaning of Rav. Rav is telling us, when you're feeling, you should never feel any hate to any human being. And this answers our question, why Shabbos Zachor is so relevant to us, even in modern contemporary times. Because it is this healthy combination of Zachor and Purim together which teaches us how to approach evil in a healthy way in a complicated world. Any questions, comments, arguments, suggestions, complaints, or concerns?
Yes, immediately. So actually you can say that it's not about destroying nation or other nations or people, not hating people or not destroying people, but about ideas. It's not,
Yes.
it's so very important to destroy ideas which are very evil in our world. That's
so I don't know at what point you joined our shir, but there was a passage which we studied of Rav Soloveitchik.
Yeah.
And right, where Rav Soloveitchik, so you were there, Rav Soloveitchik explains that it's not a race, it's an ideology. Right? Evil is not in lineage, but it's in ideas. And that's how he defines Amalek and evil, which is exactly what you're saying.
Yes. So it means it's if you sometimes if you I can imagine people go fight, people go pinch each other, but it's not about fighting and pinching physically and destroying other person physically. It's really about thinking, about ideas, yes, and about writing books, writing articles, discussions. That's very important.
About education.
Exactly.
Any other questions, comments, suggestions, complaints, or concerns?
The emphasis on the reading of the portion is so much. It's so much higher than the emphasis on the feeling part. So therefore, you say sometimes it's within a couple of hours. I mean, within a few hours, even, people are coming all day. There is a great emphasis to feel that you have to go and listen to the part that you call the mind. But it's not the mind. It's the feeling that one has to make every attempt to go and listen, to be told that this is the part that emphasizes the mind. That is much more of a feeling that people have to go than you're saying it's just part of halacha.
I don't know how people. I mean, I know what people do is a different discussion. What we're trying to explore is, what is halacha telling us? The name of the Shabbos is Zachor, to remember. And that's the first word of the passage. Zachor asher asa lecha Amalek. Remembering is not a feeling. Everyone who studied basic psychology knows this. Remembering is an exercise. Memory is an exercise of the mind. It's not a feeling. And so Shabbos Zachor is an intellectual exercise, and Purim is when we start feeling.
No, I agree. The actual activity is a mental exercise. I understand that. But the emphasis to make sure that you do it, that everybody has got the ability to go and listen to the laning, that is an emotional exercise. So
Awesome.
the emotion is the emotion to feel that hate, so to speak, is there. No?
I understand what you're saying. In other words, you're saying that what inspires people to actually go is a feeling that is accumulated over. Okay. What should inspire people is halachic discipline. Any other questions, comments, arguments, suggestions, complaints, or concerns? So I hope you appreciated this idea. And like I said, may this idea be in the memory of Shoshana Bat Yitzchak. And I wish you not only hatzlacha in everything you do, but a meaningful Shabbos Zachor and a very happy Purim.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Last time you asked me, you want to speak, I don't know when the last time was, but you want to speak for Purim. I remember that. And now I ask you when you want to speak again.
So I guess we could do something for Pesach.
Yes.
For Pesach already? Okay.
Pesach is in what?
Okay.
5 weeks, 5.5
Something,
weeks. So,
yeah, about 5,
Okay.
something.
Okay. I'll let you know.
All right.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Take care. Have a good evening. Be well.
Thank you so
Okay,
much.
bye-bye.
Thank you so much. It's so
Much.
great.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Thank you, bye.
Bye.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Thank you.